My name is Caroline Peterson, founder and Chief Design Officer at Gallery Design Studio, also the founder of eShelf, which is a software company exclusively for creative agencies like myself. So with no further ado, I'm going to move on to the next slide. I just wanted to provide like a quick agenda. Some of the concepts I will go over are going to overlap with what Mary said, but I think it's interesting to have a different take on what branding, design, and visual identity is, since a lot of these concepts are a little bit abstract. So I think having different people explain it in their own way is also extremely helpful. At least that's what I found. So in terms of what I will cover is just high level definitions. Like I said, my take on what is design, the importance of design, what is brand identity, and where it lies in the sort of broader spectrum of branding itself. And then, how can you leverage brand identity to really propel your business? Because at the end of the day, that's what we're here to do, to grow our businesses. And then I'll touch lightly on what is branding versus marketing and some design trends that we've been seeing. And then the last sort of part is really how to interact with designers. That can be a little bit of a challenge sometimes, and, how to get started. So hopefully this is useful tips for you guys. And, with no further ado, I will move on to the next slide. So before we dive in, I do want to sort of preface, design is one of those things that, and we get this a lot over the years that, oh, make this pretty. So I did want to really just set the scene of design is not just about making things pretty or frivolous aesthetics. It really spans many disciplines and influences functionality and the experience of those that interact with it. So an example would be, in terms of all the types of designs that there are out there. I mean, there are many, many more disciplines than the ones I'm showing right now, but just so you can have a reference as to what we mean by, interactions and experiences. You have fashion design, you interact with your clothes pretty much every day, right? You have architecture, the buildings that you live in, that you work in, that also influences how you experience your life. Then you have interior design, which is obviously going a level deeper, right? You have industrial design, which is product design. So, designing a chair, how you interact with that chair. And then there's obviously the part where we're going to hone in a little bit more today, which is the visual identity design. How are you conveying your brand visually, right? What is that tangible visual asset of how you convey your values and essence? Then you have graphic design, and here there's a little bit of an overlap, and I'll go into this a little bit later, sort of what the difference is. And then you have, purely digital design, so interface design, like think your Uber app, right? Or DoorDash, how that experience, all of those experiences, digital experiences are carefully designed, right? And then we have motion design. This is something that at Gallery Design Studio, we leverage a lot. It's how you design movement. So, when we say design, it's quite a big word for a lot of different disciplines. And so I just wanted to start off with, it's a big word, and it needs a special understanding, if you will. Some other not so common disciplines, and I thought it'd be interesting to mention, just because Mary also mentioned this as well. There's wayfinding. So, for example, wayfinding design. Think of when you go to the airport, how you go from the terminal, how do you go to the gate? That's an experience, right? So it's design, but it's you're designing. It's graphic, but it's also like an experience, right? And then you have customer service design. So, for example, for those of you with, service businesses, I think would be an easier example, like how you onboard your customers. What are the next 3 steps that you do after signing the contract? That also needs to be designed. And so, even though it's not your immediate thought when you think design, the design process, which I'll touch in a minute, is behind all of these disciplines. So, like I mentioned just a few moments ago, design is not just the aesthetics. It's really a holistic approach to problem solving and to creating meaningful solutions. There's a term coined by IDEO. I'm sure some of you have heard of it. It's design thinking. So, there's a lot of literature on what design thinking is, but I think the simplest way I was able to sort of explain it is really you have the design output, which is the logo, the chair, the building, but then you have the design thinking. How did you get to that logo, that chair, that building? There's a methodology, there's a mindset, there's a process. And I think this is that invisible work, right? That iceberg, if you will, the under the water work that a lot of people just don't see. And I think just based on, nearly 10 years of managing an agency, and this is why this workshop I think is extremely helpful, just understanding the behind the scenes, what is happening behind the curtains, because I think that's where a lot of the miscommunication comes in. Perhaps your design team or designer or freelancer is doing a lot of this, but you don't see it and you don't see the output, right? So there might be a mismatch in the process. So this is something that's pretty well known. Design-driven companies outperform the S&P 500 index by 219% over the course of 10 years. This is a stat from the Design Management Institute. So you can think, your Apples of the world and companies of that level, folks that really prioritize, our design-led companies really. And the reason why it's so important is, again, not the visuals, but really that experience, because it really does go hand in hand. How you interact with a company is very closely tied to the performance of your company. So now sort of narrowing it down a little bit and honing in into the part of design that we want to talk about today, identity design. Also, you can call it visual design. There's a lot of different ways of calling it, but really it's brand design. There's a lot of different ways, but essentially it's the visual elements that make up the overall image and unique appearance of a company, product, or person. So I know today we're talking about growing a business, but I think something that, especially now with the rise of social media, well, not so much the rise, but with social media everywhere, something that's also quite relevant is also your brand as a person. We're seeing a lot of big CEOs having a brand of their own in addition to their company. So that's why we've included that here. And so essentially, why do you need a visual brand? To help people recognize you, either you or your company, to distinguish you so that you're different from everyone else, and to really communicate your value and values. So it does a lot of different things. And so that's why I'm going to break it down a little bit further. So in terms of brand identity, design, what is it exactly? I think we mentioned this earlier, but it's really that tangible visual look and feel of your company or brand. And so the simplest way I was able to explain this is really, we all know there's a logo, but there's a lot more to it than that. There's colors, there's typography, there's imagery, there's layout, how you lay things out on a page, on a website, on a billboard, and then graphical elements. And so all of these have their different intricacies. So for example, imagery, it's not just, we use these 5 images. Is, for example, we don't use imagery that looks straight at the camera. We only use imagery that are black and white. We only use imagery that are low saturation. We only use imagery that have 2 people or less. So, the more nuanced you get, the more unique you become. And like Mary said before, this is really an ongoing process. This is not something you do when you start the business and that's it, it's a done deal. This evolves as your business evolves, because your market might evolve. The imagery you use really depends on your target audience, because at the end of the day, you're selling to a very specific market, and these items need to resonate with that market. So in terms of all of these elements, when you group them together and document them, this is what we call a style guide or a brand book. So the reason why we have a brand book is so when you do work with designers, or if you decide to DIY things yourself, you follow a set visual, you follow a set of rules, visual rules, to really stay consistent, because the name of the game here is consistency. There's the same we always say at Gallery Design Studios: quality is consistency. So it's not about doing things, nice, that one nice social media post, but then it looks completely different, 2 weeks from now, or you have the website looking completely different. Again, that will be distorting the experience that you're providing your ideal market, right? There's one note I want to add here, and it's probably getting a little bit into the weeds, but one thing is consistency doesn't mean that you can't evolve your brand guidelines. So this is something that we do a lot with our clients. They give us a brand book, we follow the rules, but we elevate. Each time we do something, we elevate. Maybe if relevant, we weave in trends so that they look always, modern, fresh. So it's not to say it's rigid, it's also evolving. But there are some basic elements, and I'll show you guys a few examples in a minute that will really bring that repetition, because that's really key. So here's an example of what a style guide would look like, or brand guidelines would look like. There are many ways you can do that. Do this. You can start with your story. You can talk about a little bit about your company, and then have a table of contents, how to use your logo, what colors to use, what is your typography, is there a specific weight, because it's not only about using Helvetica. Is do you use all weights of Helvetica? Do you use the lightweight only, or the bold, or a mix of both, or the titles are one way? Anyways, going into the weeds, but there's a lot of nuances within each element that I showed you guys before, to really set those rules and really ensure that everybody follows the design rules. And so here's another example. As you can see, it's following a different look and feel, but pretty much it's encompassing all of these design elements that your brand would need. So in terms of where you can use your brand identity, like Mary mentioned, and like we discussed a couple of slides ago, that tangible design of your company, there's many places, and there's a lot more that I could list, but they just won't fit on the slide. But there's stationery, there's marketing collateral, digital assets like your website, your socials, there's packaging for those of you that have products, there's signage right outside your store, there's apparel, there's vehicles, you can put a vinyl on your car, there's even interior design that can be branded too, right? You have corporate communication, you have videos, maybe you want to start and end videos in the same way, right? So that you create that repetition. Events, your booth needs to match how your stationery looks. So again, to have that cohesive look and feel. And then you have apps and software, which is following like your website, the same iconography, colors, typography, etc. So here's an example of a real example. This is one of our clients, Ernix, and this is an example of where we try to have the same look and feel across touch points. So we have their trade show booth here on the left, then we have their socials on the right, and then we did a long report design on the bottom right. So this is a tangible example of how this all plays out with real assets. So within all of these tangible assets that you can do, there are distinct priorities. So the priorities would be different for stationery than for a trade show, than for packaging. So for example, packaging design, you would really want to highlight the product presentation on the shelf. How is my product going to look on a supermarket shelf, for example? Whereas, for example, website design, the priority is not how it's going to look on the shelf, but really what is the experience? How many clicks does a person need to click to get to the meat of what you're trying to sell, right? So that you do want to have that consistent look and feel, but the priority of what you need to focus on is a little bit different. Why brand identity is important for your business growth? Well, it shapes the first impressions. First impressions are everything, and that really is key for building trust. It reinforces your company's recognition consistently, right? Is again that repetition. If you're very consistent with your brand elements, people will remember. It conveys your company values and personality. This is a little bit more abstract, but to give you an example, let's say you want to convey yourself as friendly. You might use a more curvy font, for example, right? So, and we can go deeper into this in the Q&A if you guys want, but there are ways of using design elements to convey values and personality. And fourth, it really builds emotional connection with your audience because you're designing with your target audience in mind. You're not designing for everyone. You're really thinking about who's your ideal customer, which, by the way, can evolve over time. And so that's why this is always iterating. But really, your focus should be really how do you connect in the best possible way with your target audience. It enables scalability and serves as a guideline. These brand guidelines, really setting those rules, it's kind of like an operations book. Like if you follow this, you can give this to team members and they can then do this on a large scale, which is something that's extremely important, especially once you hit that growth stage, high growth stage. You want to have this set up so that you can, continue growing. And then it really differentiates you from your competitors. Having that unique look and feel, it's really, again, that repetition, that unique touch. People remember you, people will know who you are. And so all of this is critical for business growth. So in terms of what is brand identity in the broader context of branding, I think this is a little bit abstract, but I've tried to simplify it as much as I can. Like Mary mentioned before, branding is holistic. So it goes beyond how something looks. It's really about how you make your customers feel, how it sounds, how it behaves, how every single engagement that prospects and customers have with your company is branding. And so this is why it's so complex, because not everything is tangible. Now, some aspects of branding are tangible, like brand identity, but a lot of other aspects are not. So that's why it can be challenging to explain. So I think the easiest way to explain it is if you think of it as in 3 circles, if you will. You have your brand. Within your brand, you have brand identity with other components, which I'll show you guys in a minute. And then within brand identity, you have the 6 elements that I showed you a couple of slides ago: logo, colors, typography, and all of those other elements. So in terms of brand elements, like I showed you in the previous circle, you have your brand, and then we had brand identity. That's one component, but there are other components like your brand voice. Are you a happy voice? Are you a friendly voice? So for example, Coke would be, the voice of happiness and creating moments, right? That would be one example. Then you have your brand story, the narrative or the backstory of your brand. For example, Uber, the founders of Uber back in 2008, when they couldn't find a cab in Paris on a snowy day, wouldn't it be cool to tap a button and get a cab, right? So they have that story and they can leverage that story for their branding. Then you have the brand's promise, the value or experience a company promises to deliver. So like Mary mentioned before, Disney, right? Creating happiness with magical experiences. Then you have brand values, what the company stands for and believes in. So an example that I can think of is Tom's. So for every pair that you buy, every pair of shoes that you buy, they give to a child who needs a pair of shoes. And then you have customer experience, the experience that your customers have at every touch point. So this could be, for example, the Ritz-Carlton, great rooms, great food service, great room service, very accommodating. They really want to be consistent across all of those touch points. A digital example could be United Airlines, for example, that prior to onboarding your flight, you'll get an email 24 hours before, you will get a text message And then when you're in the airport, they will tell you the gate. And then when you're on the flight, you have on-flight notifications with a graphic telling you all the different sort of stages of your flight. So all of that is carefully, designed, and that is your brand as well, right? And then we have brand identity, which is what we've been talking about, the visual manifestation of your brand's strategy, values, and positioning. So essentially, it's trying to represent all of these abstract concepts with a visual and with copy. So now I'll briefly touch on branding and marketing. They're not quite the same, even though they're quite intertwined when you're running a business. They often overlap and collaborate to achieve business goals, but they each have unique focus. So branding, the easiest way for me to try to explain it is, it's really defining who you are as a company, what you stand for, and how you want the world to perceive you. Like Mary was saying, how are people describing you when you're not in the room, right? Marketing is communicating that to your ideal audience and enticing that audience to get to buy from you, right? So one is defining who you are, your sense of self, and the other one is really finding that audience that could benefit from your product or service because you're solving a real problem and really communicating that value to them. So they're related, but they're quite distinct. And so when you take this a step further with a design lens, brand identity design is trying to manage, it's kind of that sixth component that I showed you a few slides ago. It's that sixth component. It's the company visual identity, the guidelines such as logos, colors, and typography. And then marketing design is once you have that brand guideline, once you have your logo, your colors, it's that ongoing creation of assets. So for example, your social media graphics, your videos to promote your brand, and all of these elements are following those pre-established rules that you've set up for your brand. So in terms of brand identity trends, things that we're seeing are simplified logo designs. A lot of complicated logos have been simplified. I'll show you guys a few examples in a minute. A lot of geometric shapes. We're seeing a lot of abstract forms with shapes. Muted color palettes, so a lot of beige, a lot of different shades of gray, nothing too alarming, if you will. A lot of gradients. This is big. We're seeing a lot of that. Vintage inspired branding, which is like, think of like the Coca-Cola sign or the Pepsi sign, if you will, for those of you that have been in Long Island City, for example, or established in 2015, sort of in a circle, those kind of things. Those are quite trending right now. And then flexible adaptive logos. So really you have a logo, but you have different variations of it for different use cases, depending on, where you're going to use it. So here's an example of simplified logo designs. You see from this, Burger King went to that. You have Post-its. It's really simplification. It's a lot of what we're seeing right now. And then regarding muted colors, this is an example of Dropbox, for example. You see you have different shades of beige to keep it really, distinct, but also not, too much in your face. So trends are great for inspiration, but you shouldn't just randomly follow trends, right? It does need to make sense. So, does it make sense with what you're trying to convey as a brand? So for example, we mentioned if you want to be portrayed as friendly, and for example, curved typography is something that could help you do that. Just because a trend is going for a very angular typography, you're not going to follow that blindly, right? So it's really, I think it's great if it's relevant for your brand because it keeps it fresh. We try to do this for a lot of our clients, but I wouldn't, do it blindly with no reason. There always has to be a reason for using a design element. So this is something we get frequently asked a lot, and honestly, this is something that we train our team on very frequently is how do you know design is good, right? Because at the end of the day, the big challenge we face as designers is really explaining why something is well done, because it's also abstract, right? So we've tried to systematize, if you will, what good design is. And so this is my attempt at doing that. So we've divided it into 9 different steps. So every time we get a design project, our designers, think of it as this is like our checklist, if you will. We will follow this checklist. Are we following the grid? And I'll show you guys an example from Uber in a minute, what we mean by that. But great design usually follows the grid. It keeps it tidy, it keeps it neat, it keeps it professional, and it's pixel perfect. Because at the end of the day, you want to be very precise when you're designing. The second thing is hierarchy. Are the right words being showcased in the best way? So for example, if you have a title and you want that to be the highlight, is it formatted in the best way? You want the title to be big and visible, and have the secondary copy somewhere else and less visible. There always has to be a focal point, which kind of ties into the next point. When you have a layout, an ad, a website, there always needs to be one focal point. And then you have supplementing elements, but really it needs to follow a very easy flow for the recipient. Then you have typography, how you're using your typography. This is also a big one. Alignment, is it nice and tidy? And this kind of ties back to the grid. Is your designer using a grid and following it and keeping it tidy? Framing, right? This is very important for photography. If you're intertwining photography into your brand identity, you don't want to be typically you don't want to be chopping people's heads. You want to, frame it in a way it's making sense. Do you want to use the rule of thirds? Do you want to do the placement on the left or on the right? What are you thinking there, right? All of that needs to be thought out. Then you have balance. Are items on the page, on the website, on the video balanced? And balance doesn't necessarily mean symmetry. It just means, is it making sense visually? It's not too much on any side of the page or the website, but it can be asymmetrical as well. This is probably my favorite. When we do a design, how can we simplify it even more? Our rule is, if it doesn't serve a purpose, remove it. So for example, if we do a design and we add a line that's not adding any value, it's not emphasizing a title, it's not emphasizing anything specific, remove it. Because at the end of the day, less is more. And then this is the big one, it's repetition. Touch point after touch point, are you being consistent? This is, again, quality is consistency. And so here are a few awesome examples. So like I was telling you guys, here's an example of how Uber leverages the grid. And so this is, I believe, for an editorial design. And so they're following the grid for all of their collateral pieces. So you have this big banner here, this billboard, sorry, and then you have these guys here. But they're repeating the same look and feel, same typography, framing. It's very consistent, distinct, and for the different campaigns, but still very cohesive. And here's another example for Instacart, the app, the billboard, the bag, still recognizable regardless of the touch point, still unique in its own different use cases, but they're doing a great job of having all the right elements and no additional fluff, if you will. So I'm going to pause here.
Perfect. Thank you, Carolyn. So what is the average price or the estimate that we should expect to pay for a brand book or a style guide?
So I'm going to touch on pricing towards the second part. And this again is estimates, because the range is very, very big, but I'll share with you guys some pricing at the end.
Great, thank you. Should the business owner choose the company colors, or does the graphic designer help choose strong color scheme for connecting?
I mean, I'm a huge advocate of involving the designer. It can be a partnership, right? Because at the end of the day, as the business owner, you are the subject matter expert, right? And you know things that the designer doesn't. Like saying, if you were a person if your company were a person, who would you be? Sharing that kind of information would help the designer distill and figure out color schemes, right? If you want to have a more professional vibe or a more friendly vibe. But I would actually work as a partnership.
Great, thank you. Just a reminder, everyone, submit your questions via chat, or of course, raise your hand to ask a question live. We are going to go ahead and move forward because those are all the questions we have at the moment, but there will be another opportunity for Q&A. So back to you, Caroline. Oh, wait just a second. Sheila raised her hand. Okay, Sheila, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, so I'm interested in an example of a flexible logo, but in particular one which demonstrates, let's say, an overarching brand, but with like different lines of businesses. So like each line of business represents a different product.
So essentially you have like one company that has a bunch of sub brands. Is that what you're saying?
It's one overall brand with a set of common values, and then what my company does is we curate different products which corresponds to those values. But it's the lines of businesses that I'm trying to come up with a branding strategy for.
That's a tough one because it really, I mean, I would need to know more, but there's no wrong answer here. You can go two ways. You can follow a similar look and feel and then, change the last part. For example, ABC catering, ABC water bottles, right? Follow that same logo and then have like a slight difference in color to distinguish the different sub-brands, if you will. Or you can change the logo completely. It really depends on the audience. There's a lot more to it than I won't be able to give you an example, like an answer right off the bat, but it really depends on your audience. So for example, when I created the software for eShelf, initially we started with eShelf powered by Gallery Design Studio, but I realized that this was not speaking to the software's audience. It's a completely different audience. So I decided to rebrand and not have anything to do with Gallery Design Studio, and it has a completely different logo. So I hope that helps. But yeah, both ways are correct depending on your audience.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sheila. Okay, Whitney has a question regarding simplification. She has a brand message that is very, very strong, but also she feels that it's too long and may bore the target audience. So how can you go about doing that better if it's something that might potentially cause the audience to snooze?
Well, first of all, the fact that you're thinking about this is great. Honestly, try ChatGPT, try Notion, and use the simplify or the shorten. It won't give you your exact sort of, what you're looking for, but it will definitely help. And you just do variations. And then what you do is you kind of do a cocktail. You'll take that word from that variation, that word, and then just kind of put it together. It's a great, great brainstorming exercise.
Excellent, thanks. So those are all the questions we have at this time. There will be another opportunity for final Q&A, everyone. So submit them via chat, or of course, when we pause, you can raise your hand to ask live. So back to you, Caroline.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, thanks for all your great questions. So yeah, I think, in a nutshell, designers are visual problem solvers. And I think, you guys attending this webinar is a great foundation, because understanding where these design people are coming from, I think is already setting you up for success. The reason why it's so hard, what we do is it's really taking what's in your head and turning it into something tangible. So something that we tell our clients a lot is, it's easier to criticize something that's existing than something that's not. So for example, they'll tell us, well, we need a report design, or we need a trade show booth, or whatever, we need a landing page, but they don't know what they want. Us, taking our best guess and then showing them, is actually helping them figure out what they want. And they're like, no, I want to look more like so-and-so. I want this, I want that. So it is a process, and don't expect to have perfection from the get-go, because that's not part of the design process. Going back to that very first slide of design methodology process, it's a process because it's not, you know, we're trying to follow as rigorous of a methodology as possible, right? So you know, it's important to be patient and to respect the discovery process and really ensure that you and the designer are both understanding each other. Because if there's one thing I've realized after all of these years, the biggest issue is communication. And I know everybody hears this all the time, but that's the biggest challenge. So what does your designer need for a good outcome? So if you guys engage with either a freelancer or a graphic design team or whatever it is, what do they need in order to have a good outcome? So first and foremost, they need to understand the business goal. We see a lot of people just what we call, you know, pixel pushing. Oh, just do this, make this pretty, the end. And that's not the way to go about it. If you really want strong results, you're going to have to explain, and you don't have to go into the weeds. It doesn't have to be as technical as you would explain it to someone else, but you do need to give the overview. What are you trying to do with your brand? What are you trying to convey? Why, right? You always need to give designers context. Another thing I strongly recommend is regular client designer check-ins. So at Gallery Design Studio, for example, we have one every week or every 2 weeks, depending on the engagement. But this is key because even if it's just a quick 15-minute, hey, what do you think? What are you feeling? Is this resonating? Do we need to change something? These are invaluable for progress. We do have Slack messaging in the interim, but I think, you know, that call really just to hash things out and even brainstorm is super helpful for both sides. Because something that I've realized as well for the business owners is that the design process helps the business owners think of their business in a different light as well, because the designer is bringing a different lens. It's a completely different way of seeing it. And so they're both feeding each other, so to speak. The third important thing is really focus on practical, usable designs. This is something where, you know, I'm kind of going to put my business owner hat. Designers like to experiment and they want to really push brands forward and really bring in trends and all that stuff that we were talking about earlier, but it does need to be practical. So one example, we had a project where we had to design a pitch deck. So one of our clients wants to raise money, and they also wanted to leverage that pitch deck for their sales initiative. So one was to raise money and the other one is for their sales team to continue selling the software that they have. And so the challenge was the designer did a great job, but it was quite complex. And it had a lot of elements that if you put in a template are quite hard for non-designers to use. So you need to strike that balance of, okay, are we pushing the brand forward? Is it having visual elements that are interesting and unique? But is it also practical for our non-designers like sales to use and implement and stay on brand? Because at the end of the day, we're doing this so that you stay on brand and you're strong, right? And consistent. The fourth point is flexibility and iterative mindset. This is my favorite. Like I said, it's an iterative process. The designer is going to present something, you're going to give feedback, and then there's a feedback loop. And so it's not a waterfall effect that you give instructions, the designer does something, and the end. It doesn't work like that. And you have to be mentally prepared that this is an iterative process. And the designer also has to be prepared. So it works both ways. We touched on this in the previous points, but less is more. There needs to be a reason for every graphic element. And also that's kind of tying back to the focus on practical designs as well. Simplification, all of these concepts are intertwined. You want to keep it as simple as possible also, you know, so that it's easy to use. And then I know I keep saying this, but it really is such an important point. Stay consistent across assets. You need to ensure that your designers are staying consistent, that they leverage look and feel. If they did a flyer for you last week, that they leverage elements of that for your landing page design, for your packaging, and it's always tying together. This is very, very, very important. Key things you should know to make the most of your designer: know your target audience needs and problem. At the end of the day, this is kind of that marketing component. Who are you selling to? Who's your ideal market? The riches are in the niches, right? In the case of Gallery Design Studio, we focus on selling our design services to enterprise software companies. You have to really dive deep into who are you serving. And back to somebody's question previous, this will also determine whether you do a unique logo or not. One of the things to consider, right? Clearly articulate the goals that you want. It's, again, repeating that first point, but it's so important that I think it's worth mentioning again. And provide timely feedback. There's nothing worse than doing a design and then the client takes 3-4 weeks and you lose the momentum. This is like software development. You need to, once you deploy something, you need to give feedback, and so you don't lose that thread. And then the tighter that feedback loop, the quicker you can go to market with something very strong. Understand basic principles and trust your designers. So really, like this workshop today, you're educating yourself, which is awesome. You're educating yourself on the process, what to look for, even if you're not an expert, but really understanding, how to look for a good designer. You do need to trust experts. I will put an asterisk, but you also do need to choose your experts carefully, right? So there's multiple. This is a longer sort of discussion, but really check portfolios of people that of designers that have work that you like. I would say for you guys that is the quickest way. Also, when you reach out to them, see how they communicate. This is also a big one. Like I said, communication is often the biggest pitfall that we're seeing. If you like their work and they're communicating in a way responsive and in a way that you like, there's high chances that they could be a good fit. Obviously, it's not a guarantee, but once you build a relationship and you know that they're good people, trust them as they design things for you. And they will do things you don't like, and that's okay. That's part of the process. So just keep that in mind. Prioritize consistency and future adaptability. Again, it's that, is this a scalable brand? Very important. And maintain an open exchange of ideas with designers. So this has happened many times. One of my designers will present something and I'll be like, no, this is terrible. And then 1 month later, I'm like, wow, she was right. And so swallow your ego. Because at the end of the day, it's about the growth of your business. It's about what's best for your customers, and it's about doing good work. So you may be wrong, and it's okay. And just stay open and vulnerable. Biggest mistakes I see new clients make. Many, but I've tried to consolidate these into 6 points. Lack of clarity is the big one. Again, that communication aspect is the biggest I see. Over-managing designers. This is a shame because I'll say, some of the designs, this doesn't happen as often now, but in the beginning when we started, a lot of the designs we did, we were not honestly very proud of because it just had too much either content, too much imagery, too many design elements. And so that's why we made simplification really like a rule within our agency. And this is also something that we're educating our clients consistently. Because at the end of the day, you want a clear focal point, and we want our clients' audience to be very clear on what it is that they're promoting and selling, right? So less is more. Sorry, I realized I bled into the next point, cluttering designs, but over-managing designers, the reason why I kind of bled into cluttering is typically when people over-manage designers, they add a lot of things. So that's the correlation. Choosing cost over quality. Design is an investment. It's not an expense. It's an investment. This is something that once you have it, this is an asset that you own, and it just grows in value over time. So, and again, what is the price you'd pay for how people perceive you? So, I know, when you're starting out, you have limited budget, but over time, as you grow and as you can allocate a little bit more money into this is something that I strongly suggest you save for, because it's key. Not designing with the future in mind. Again, this goes back to scalability. You really want to have a brand that's scalable. going back to not overcomplicating the design, making sure that non-designers can leverage your brand, etc., etc. Making sure your brand guidelines are always updated as you periodically elevate your brand, even if it's small nuances. You always want to ensure that you're ready for growth. And then we also see a lot of folks prioritizing visuals over copy. And when it comes to graphic design, this is a marriage. Like these two go hand in hand. It's not, one is not more important than the other. And we've had instances where literally the thing was just one sentence. Again, to that question of, you know, how do I simplify my unique value proposition? It's so strong that sometimes that's the design. Obviously with great typography, good spacing, etc., etc. But anyways, design projects go well when the client is respectful towards the design and the design team. This is, it might seem obvious, but you know, we've had disrespectful clients and we disengage. So just keep that in mind. Be nice to people. They'll be nice back. Even if you're frustrated, communicate that you're frustrated, that you don't like the design, but you can still do that in a respectful way. Provide timely feedback that is concrete and succinct. Don't say, I don't like this. This is not helpful. You don't like this because it's too much. It's not, I'm not feeling XYZ. Like, even if you think you're not doing a good job at explaining, try to explain to the best of your ability. And if you can't explain, say, I want us to look more like, we had a client, for example, say the other day, we want to look more like IBM. That was enough for us. And then we nailed that video's look and feel. But just anything that you can think of, but saying I don't like it is really not good communication. And try to be succinct, because if you give paragraphs and paragraphs of feedback, designers are not going to read every single aspect. Which is, it shouldn't be the case, but just from experience, that's what happens. And so if you do feel like you have a lot to say, that's where that phone call comes in, not an email or a Slack message, etc. Provide necessary assets in a timely fashion. If there is any imagery, any footage, anything, any past design work, even if it's stuff that you don't want to use, but maybe there's something that your designer can extract, give it to them, because that will speed up, believe it or not, it will speed up the process. Respect project timing. This is important, right? You can't request a video and expect it tomorrow. There is, like we mentioned towards the beginning, there's a methodology, there's a thinking, and there's a lot of iceberg moments there that you're not seeing that is required for that output to happen. So if your designer says they need 4 weeks, respect it. You can have check-ins every week, so you're not waiting and you're completely in the wrong direction. We do that with our clients. I think that's fair on both sides, but don't expect a finished product at an unreasonable timeline. And you're not the expert, so respect the expert who's advising you. Yeah, and that kind of ties into the last point, respect the importance of the design process. So at our agency, a typical design project looks like this. I mean, there's variations of this, but this is just one example. We'll strategize with the client what needs to get done. And this, depending on the project, might happen over Slack or a phone call. It just really depends on the intricacy, because our clients are typically ongoing. We know them very well. So sometimes we can just be briefed over Slack, but if it's a big trade show, for example, we will hop on a call and brainstorm. And then we'll draft copy. So, we do a lot of videos, a lot of socials, trade show booths, like I showed you guys earlier. So we'll draft that initial copy. And then we'll send that to the client, again, to have those periodic check-ins. The client will review, they will see if it feels right, if it's resonating with their target market, because they're the experts, right? We'll incorporate that feedback and resend. And then we'll go into the visual part. Okay, if it's a video, for example, we'll do storyboards, which is static frames of the video. Now, with less experienced clients, we will not show so many steps. We will show more finished products. So for example, we will do what is called an animatic, a rough version of a video. We would not show static frames of a video, because we found that folks that don't understand the creative process often get confused. They're like, why is this static? I asked for a video. So there's a lack of comprehension there. So we found that If, if they're not too familiar, we'll give them an animatic. We'll send it again, like we did with copy, we'll send it to the client. They'll leave us feedback. And then this is an iterative process, right? This is what I was saying before. This is a loop. And here we want the feedback to be tight and not take too long, because otherwise we lose momentum and the output of the design will take much longer. So this is really important to keep nice and tight. And then, once the client reviews and is happy with it, we will export the final creative assets. In terms of project timing, I mean, look, this really depends. And I know some of you will probably say, how long does it take to design a logo, which I have not included, because our agency, we actually don't design brand identities anymore. We actually do the ongoing part. But this could be applicable also for brand identity. And I know it's a vague answer, but it really would depend. So in the stuff that we typically do, social media, for example, for clients that we already know and know their brand guidelines, 1 to 2 weeks for a social media bundle. For an explainer video, 2-minute explainer video, it could be anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks. That includes a script, voiceover, et cetera, et cetera. It just depends on the nature of the video. If it's video editing or if it's motion design, right? What we discussed in the beginning, it just depends on what type of video we're doing. And then, for example, for trade shows, it depends on the size of the trade show, 4 to 12 weeks. If it's a small booth, then we can get that done relatively quickly. If it's 2-story type trade show, then obviously that would take much, much longer. So this is a quote from one of our clients. Not to promote ourselves, but just so you guys see, how this is helping businesses. And they've grown so much since we partnered with them. And in one of our catch-up calls, he said that your work helped us have more confidence to pitch to bigger and better clients. And now they've been listed as top software companies for franchises this September. So, we're super proud of them. And this is a true story. So it's also, these are the sort of indirect wins that you get from having a strong brand. It's confidence, and confidence, it means a lot in business. So I know someone asked about pricing. Again, this depends, that there's sort of 3 avenues you can go with design. You can have freelance designers. For brand identity, you can also have design agencies like us, but we don't do the branding aspect, but there are other folks that do. And then there's online platforms like 99 Designs, Fiverr, Upwork. There's a lot of options. So based on some research, it's a big range. You can go with a freelance designer. It can be anywhere from $250 to $10,000 from a brand identity package. So that includes logo, colors, and then you should get your brand guidelines together with that. Design agencies are going to be more expensive. Reason being because you just have a lot more experts under one umbrella, right? You have a specialist for each thing. So that costs money. So it can go all the way up to $50,000. And then you have online platforms, similar to freelance designers. It can be anywhere from $50,000 to a couple $1,000s. So, there's a big range. And if you have a set budget, I would, filter by budget, which I believe you can do on these online platforms. How can you start with little money? Start simple. Again, the concept of less is more is applicable to this too. Begin with just a logo and a basic color scheme. Don't try to figure it all out in the beginning. Like Mary said, it's go to market first. Ensure that, there's a need for your product or service and that you're solving a very real problem and that there's a need for it. And then as you start seeing people interested, then you build upon that. Once you see that you've reached product market fit, that you see that you have something good going on, then you can maybe invest a little bit more money in a full package. Maybe you even rebrand the logo. And this is an ongoing process. You can DIY some of it. You can use Canva, Adobe Spark. So that's an option as well. You can have a pre-made logo shop. And again, you can do this to start and then, get a professional to do this for you. At the end of the day, it's really about going to market first and then iterating. You can go to online marketplaces, like I mentioned before, Fiverr, Upwork, 99 Designs. you can barter your services. I've done this. So I did this when I was starting out, actually. So if you're good at XYZ, maybe you know, exchange with a designer and you exchange services. And then you can also go to design schools or universities, which there are plenty in New York. And you know, they're looking for experience. You have a limited budget, and that could be definitely a win-win. Big thing, keep tabs on your competitors. I strongly recommend identifying your top 5 to 10. If you need to keep tabs on more, absolutely do it, but at least 5 to 10. Research them on socials. Leverage ChatGPT. You can do competitor analysis on ChatGPT. It is up to 2021, so it's not the most updated, but it's definitely helped me understand, you know, my competitor landscape. You can use the New York Library databases. This is an amazing resource. You can ask your local library. They can teach you all the ins and outs there. It's incredible. You can read competitor reviews, Google, Clutch, or whatever's relevant for your industry. Ask yourself, how are you different, right? Even if it's a small difference, you know, write that down. It's important. And then, you know, that's something that you can weave into your branding exercise. Check competitors periodically. It's not a one and done deal. Like everything in this game, it's always iterative, it's always ongoing, it's always evolving. So you can't stand still. But lastly, don't obsess over your competitors. You know, check them out, know what's out there so you're knowledgeable and you know, educated, but also stay unique. You have a very unique angle, even if it's a slight angle. Even if it might seem small, you know, stay unique. And if you have a market and you're testing it and you're having clients, you're doing something right. So be proud of your uniqueness and leverage that. How to stop the scroll or stroll. This is just one example of what we did for one of our clients for one of their social media posts. They're having an event soon. And so, you know, what we're trying to do is how can we help people, you know, stop and really pay attention, right? So we like to use bold colors, right? If it's a white background, use a stark color to really, so it has high contrast. Have short copy. And if you have, you know, if you're good with words, you can also try to be funny. And again, that also depends on your brand and your brand personality. Maybe that's not the case, but in this case, these folks are on the happier side. And so keep it short, keep it punchy. And at the end of the day, what's the focal point? That there's a summit, right? So that's why that's really big. We give what's needed, the date, the location, and then if applicable, put what we call a call to action. So what is the next step that you want folks to take after seeing, you know, a graphic or an ad or whatever. So what can you do to get started now with your brand identity design? Take inventory of what you already have. Determine your high leverage point. So if your website is bringing you the most clients, double down on that. Don't try to boil the ocean and do a million things. Like really just look at what is working for you right now and just focus on that and focus the designs for that. Figure out what you want to figure out if you want to do it yourself or if you want to hire someone, so that you need to kind of map out what sort of budget you have, and that's how you can make that decision. If you do it yourself, you do have to carve out some time, so there's always that trade-off. And if you're doing it alone, set time limits, right? Because you can get lost in translation here and lose track of time, and then maybe not get other needle moving activities that your business needs, you know, because you're doing this. And if you do choose a designer, share what you have so far, even if it's stuff that you don't want to use, but at least you can say, hey, I don't want to use this, but this is what we have. This still helps the designer. And yeah, and start collaborating.